Who doesn't love the smell of baked goods, the scent of bread rising or pie cooling? At least to me, the scent is more closely related to an emotional reaction than anything else. This must be because in the past I've always loved damn treats, and to me, these fresh baked pastries are the ecstasy of the scent of the world, pure concentrated happiness into a small loafed bread of bread. I don't know why, but I've always loved these things, and I can't exactly put my finger on why. A few months ago, a bakery opened a few doors down from me, and the smell sliced through the polluted air of the urban landscape like a knife through butter, causing a sense of euphoria to anyone within a mile of it. I gotta tell you, this thing was heavenly. Now, don't ask where this seemingly heavenly bakery was, because it's not in anybody's interest to go anywhere near that damn place. And I should introduce you before I tell you about my, experience. My name is Samuel. I lived with my girlfriend in a cramped, albeit comfortable apartment above an electronics store downtown of our city. Her and I both had part-time jobs, and neither of us could afford college, and we knew it. But we both aspired to go into the culinary industry someday. Maybe open our own restaurant, maybe get a family and live in said restaurant. When we heard a German bakery open down the street, we were fairly ecstatic, but momentarily confused. How could we not notice any construction or promotional signs of any sort? We walked by its location every single day, and we would have noticed this, but nonetheless we discarded it and blamed it on the routine disregarding of our surroundings of our city and our general lack of care for our neighbors. We walked exactly down to that bakery to try out their goods. The first thing that would have hit our nostrils was the scent of powerful bread, pies, and cookies, and other delicious baked goods. We looked at each other in gleeful surprise. We were still a block away, but the scent was clear, as if we were in the kitchen. A minute or so later, we arrived in the front of our destination. It had a colorful yellow and black awning, and a big clear window in the front. And written in big, playful font, the window said, Der Beluge Verfehl Bakery. I have no idea how to actually pronounce that. It's a German word nonetheless. It was the best bakery outside of Germany, so it proclaimed. We eagerly walked inside, but then stopped dead in the doorway, paralyzed by the onslaught caused by the freshly baked strudels and just the sense of whatever in the hell was coming out of that oven. After we awoke from our momentary bliss filled with unconsciousness, we looked and saw that the bakery wasn't very busy. Very few customers, very small tables, and a seemingly small entrance by what seemed to be the most delicious thing I've ever smelled. This again struck me as odd, but nonetheless we walked up to the counter and we were greeted by a 5-foot-tall, 3-foot-wide man with a smile that went from ear to ear, with a handlebar mustache and a white coat with a tall chef's hat and a perfect cartoon chef expression. Guten Tag, friends. Welcome to mine humble bakery. The cook would have greeted us with his thick German accent. What may I treat this lovely couple to today? I've just finished a bunch of wonderful mulberry strudels, and if you're interested... Mulberry strudels? I asked with a optimistic curiosity. Now, there's something you don't see very often. I'll give it a try, good sir. Und very good, the cook replied. And for the lovely lady? My girlfriend would have responded with, I'll try whatever you recommend, chef. Simply surprise me. Ah, a surprise. Well, I'll see what they have for a woman of such beauty, the cook said in such a playful tone. And please, my lady, call me Franz. It's very nice to meet you, Franz, I said. It's about it's about time we got a half-decent bakery in this crap-hole of a town. So, how much do I owe you? Well, it's mine grand opening, so I will give you a discount. I get you some tea with your pastries, and I'll only charge you $2.50. $2.50? What the fucking hell? That's amazing! I would have responded with glee. You, sir, are a excellent welcomed addition to our town. I handed him some money, and we took our seat, and we begun to wait for our food. When our food was brought to us, I was met with a plate-sized strudel that made my salivary glands go into overdrive. My girlfriend was handed a massive slice of what was apparently strawberry apple cream pie. I found it to be an odd combination, but after having a taste of it, I was met with a rainbow of flavor, sending me into foodgasmic dreamland that I would only awake from later. When we finished our food, we felt that we had eaten almost 2 Christmas dinners, satisfying and very full. However, my euphoria was broken when I saw the clock. It was 4 fucking o'clock. We had been there for over 6.5 hours. I jumped up, shifting the mass of food in my stomach, and it did not absolutely approve of that. I fought through the slight nausea and went home with my girlfriend. I had to work in a fucking hour. I worked at a bar. It was Friday night. If I missed work for happy hour on a Friday, my boss would have my head. Holy shit, I managed to get my clothes and I ran down to the bar with only a minute before my shift started. My boss gave me a stern look, but that was the absolute worst of it. My night was fairly normal, except I couldn't figure out how my girlfriend and I managed to be at that bakery for over 6 hours. I always walk home at 3 a.m. and after an hour of cleaning up the bar, I was exhausted, so it was more of a stumble home. A drunken stumble home. As I approached home, I began to smell the bakery. It was much weaker as there was no baking being done, but the scent there lingered. I took a deep inhale, but a few seconds into my breath, my nose was attacked with the most disgusting scent I had ever encountered. I glared and I gagged and I immediately fell to my knees, heaving. The foul odor was the most disgusting thing I've ever encountered. The odor was of something like an animal that had been rotting in the sun, or a worm in a compost pile that smelt of decay, and it was disgusting. It was right next to the bakery. I looked over to it. The air began to fill with the most pleasant scent of baked goods once again, but after that shock, I was not able to breathe too much deeply. In the back of the store, I saw what looked like to be a silhouette of Franz. However, this Franz was much, much larger. It moved slowly and jiggled with every step. I lost sight of it after a few moments and I decided to continue my way home. I was just outside of my building, having already forgotten the strange sensation I had just gone through, when I heard a deep, guttural belch, disgusting and loud enough that it should have woken the entire city. No human could make such a grotesque outburst of what appeared to be a callous explosion of methane gas. And me being the immature young man, I know burps when I hear them. But this was not natural. This was not human. After staring towards the bakery in disbelief for a few moments, I simply passed it off as exhaustion, and I went into my home, and I passed out to my already sleeping girlfriend. I never had an experience like that near that bakery, but I've never had to go near that bakery in the middle of the night again. My girlfriend and I continue to go to the bakery almost on a daily basis, each time staying for less and less time, and eating our massively proportioned pastries more heavily. We, needed them for some reason. It was 2 weeks after our first visit to this bakery that our lives was changed forever. We had to leave the bakery when Franz called for us to come back. I've heard you two would like to get into the culinary arts someday, yes? Franz would say gleefully. Would you see mine kitchen? Perhaps assist me with some of mine bacon? I looked at my girlfriend, and I was in shock by this, as we both turned to Franz in almost perfect sync. My girlfriend and I both responded with a gleeful, "Fuck yeah!" Franz led us behind the counter and opened the door, and we walked into the kitchen, and I stood there frozen in shock. Behind a door was labeled a sign that was said, "Employees only." This was not a kitchen. It was a dungeon of sorts, and I was about to turn to run, but before I could, I felt a sharp blow to my head, and then everything went black. I woke what felt like a few hours later in that same dungeon that I'd just been lured into. But this time I was hanging by a rack, shackled by rusted cuffs that dug into my wrist as my body's weight pulled down on them. As soon as I took a breath, I was met with the disgusting fume of decay, which I had smelt just outside the bakery a few weeks ago. I immediately vomited and I begun to cry. We can't have that," said a familiar voice. "We need you to be good and fat, so there will be no more of this wasteful explosion." It was Franz. He had a much more of a malicious tone than his usual cheery one. He stood there in the middle of the hallway, and he shouted, "Wake up!" There was a sudden influx of movement, met shortly later by screams of terror and cries of helplessness, vomiting, and panicked questioning voices, all quickly silenced by a guttural belch. I looked over to where Franz was, but wherever he stood, there wasn't Franz. It wasn't even human. There stood a 10-foot-tall, obese monstrosity with chunks of torn flesh covering spots of muscle tissue and other things. It had a long, thin arms that dragged behind it as it hobbled down the corridor. It got close enough to me to see that it was enormous. It had an enormous mouth with yellow teeth and a thick yellow tongue hanging just on the outside. There were no eyes, no nose, nor ears. I felt my gut turn as I was too shocked to vomit. The beast eventually reached the end of a corridor and grabbed the extremely overweight woman and ripped her from her shackles, tearing her arms from her body in the process. She screamed in pain and was begging the police to leave her alone, but it was too late. No, it was fucking too late. She had her arms missing and she was bleeding profusely. The beast brought the engorged gut of the victim to its huge mouth, and with one swift chomp between her shoulders, her waist went right off. She was silenced immediately as her disembodied head and legs fell to the floor into what was a puddle of blood, bone shards, tissue, and what I only could presume to be whatever was left in her gut, creating this odd smell of bio. The beast is chewing loudly, obnoxiously. You could hear every rib snap, every swallow, every bit of flesh tear in the teeth of this abomination. At this point in time, I was passing out of sheer disgust, and I was awoken by the scent of pie. Apple pie, my favorite. It took me to realize that I was still in captivity, but after I felt a stinging or scraping along the rusted cuffs, it all came back to gruesome feeding, and I went, oh fuck. Was all burned into my brain, the screaming, and I cried for but another moment, but I stopped when I realized when I was still smelling that apple pie, and not a overbearing of, well, death and decay. I looked down and I saw this pie. It was about the size of my head, and it was resting on a metal pedestal. On the crust was written in blood, "Eat it." A few moments later, the pedestal was moved to my face, and I felt a metal plate against the back of my head, and I was forced to put my face into this pie. I could hardly breathe, and I had to eat my way out. I know that thing was just trying to make me fatter, so the more tasty when it devours like me, like it did that woman. Oh God. But I couldn't help it. If I didn't eat it out, I would suffocate. And I ate through the whole pie, and my stomach was like a brick, feeling like it was about to burst. But I held it down, avoiding the guttering beast, because I didn't want him to fucking look at me and tear my arms off and all that magical shit. I was amazed when the flimsy metal cuffs couldn't hold anything, let alone an obese man. Fate seemed to be in my favor. I saw a crack and a change. A large crack, in fact. I looked around to see if the beast was nearby, and I couldn't see it, so I lifted my legs up, and I kicked down with all my might. Now I actually managed to get the pie out of my fucking face, and I managed to get the fucking... Let me see. For all the force of muscle, I could hear a crack. The chain weakened, but unfortunately, at the same time, I heard the guttural moans of the monster. It knew that I was escaping and it was coming for me. I kicked my legs down yet again, weakening the chain once more. I heard stomps of the beast approaching. My heart pounded faster and faster than it ever had did before. And then as I panicked, I put all my strength into one massive kick and I felt the chain broke and I fell. I hit the ground. I twisted my ankle as I did, and I held back the sense of, or just need to scream as I looked and saw the monstrosity clumsily coming towards me. Adrenaline begun to pulse through my veins as my survival instincts kicked in. Fucking run. That's all I had to do. I got up, ignored the pain, and I begun to run away from the beast in the corridor. When I saw it let out a howl, it shook my bones to the very core. I had to slow and cover my eyes as soon as it was on me, and I just continued running. The abomination ran after me. With each step, it took its massive arms flew from side to side and struck other prisoners. Everybody was screaming at this point in either fear or joy that someone had escaped. It was hard to tell, as the blood from my adrenaline that fueled my heart, my head, and everything like that was causing me to go loopy. Screams I heard. Then something made me stop dead in my tracks. Sam! It was my fucking girlfriend. I looked at her. She was between me and the monster. I saw her looking at me crying. I looked at her one last time before she muttered the words, "I love you." The monster's gigantic arms flew up and... I'll spare you the details, but her head was no longer on her shoulders at this point in time, and her skull flew in front of me. I broke inside. My one and true love was just beheaded by this demonic demon. I was angry, and I was also sad, and pain had begun to blur my logic. The adrenaline begun to course through my veins and I continued to make my way towards the exit. It was in view. I could see it. I smelt prematurely, and I suddenly felt a claw grab at my ankle, and it ripped my foot clean off. I screamed as breath filled my lungs and the monster swallowed my foot fucking whole. I crawled for the door, and I managed to slam it shut behind me. I was in the alley outside the bakery, and I was about to get my phone to call an ambulance when I heard a loud, obnoxious belch again, and I cringed and I blacked out. When I awoke, I was in a hospital bed. I was told that a passerby found me and called an ambulance just in time. I would need a prosthetic foot and some serious psychotherapy, but I would be all right. When I was asked about the bakery, they assumed that I was fucking insane. They told me that there was never a bakery there. There was no construction. There was no nothing. That the people that were supposedly there never fucking existed. That there was no such thing as a bakery there, and that the building had been abandoned, and the last place that owned it was simply a storage store or something along a storage building. I don't even fucking know. And the reason why I'm writing this is because I felt that I need to put out a warning. Because I'm empty, and an empty lot sits where a lot of memories once were. And I need to warn you guys. I really need to fucking warn you guys. Because I got a text from my friend Dom from across the border, and he sent me a text that simply read, "Dude, next time you're in town, come try this bakery. It's the best food I'd ever eaten. It's called Der Beluge Ver's Bakery." It's the same fucking sign from before. It's just somewhere else. It's always been fucking somewhere else. I need time to recompose myself. This is me signing off. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, That Creepy Reading, here to give you the story review of today. I know I haven't did this in a while, but there's been a few things. If you watch my update video, you probably understand why, but why don't we dig right into this? This is called the Bloody Glutton Bakery. And there are a few issues with the story. The writing is a bit off, and sometimes it's fairly hard to understand what the story is trying to give. and it's generally just a very hard read for general parts. Like, there's some parts that are very easy, but there are other parts that are very hard because of the way it's written and all that magical jazz. But nonetheless, it was a good one. My only complaint would be is that I would love for there to be more creepy build-up and more creepy imagery before we got to the end, and the ending is really one of the biggest, hardest parts for me. It seemed very disjointed the way that it was written. It seemed very odd, and it seemed just... I don't know how to describe it, but it seemed there was a lot of gore for the sake of gore, and a lot of parts that didn't quite make sense. At least to me. Overall, this was a fairly good story, at least in terms of the way it was written. The characters were nice, and I wish I could have seen more dialogue, but nonetheless, for a 20-minute story, this was a fairly good one. Not the best, but certainly not the worst, as it doesn't leave any loose ends to be filled. Also, yeah, I think that should do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this creepypasta, as... well, I certainly enjoyed it. And next time you're in town, why don't you check out your local bakery?